Managing Director of SJ Solutions. Seema has been specialising in pharmacovigilance for 20 years and has headed up global pharmacovigilance and medical affairs before setting up SJ Solutions. SJ Solutions services span both consulting and contracting to provide solutions to drug safety, research, and other affairs relating to the running of a business within the pharmaceuticals industry. She's helped companies in implementing the new EU legislation and is currently studying for her MSc in epidemiology. Seema, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everybody. So we're going to talk about the quality management system today, and I think one caveat that I did want to give was that my background is actually drug safety and not quality per se, as in not a quality professional. And this is really my understanding of what is required based on the documentation and legislation. So if we look at the legislation, so from the update in 2012, QMS was a major focus and became a legal requirement with a need to ensure that quality systems were in place and to ensure that there was adequate and effective PV performance in order to comply with the legal requirements of PV tasks and responsibility. And this is laid out in GVP Module 1, Pharmacovigilance Systems and their quality systems. So if we look at Module 1, you can see that the quality cycle is defined here. And you have quality planning, which is where your structures are defined for management of the quality system. And then you have integrated and consistent processes that make up that quality system as well. And this can be documented in SOPs, work instructions, etc. And we'll come on to that in a second. Quality adherence then really refers to the use of the QMS and the processes to manage the different activities. Now, I put feedback here because I do think that there is a need for feedback from those performing the tasks into the system to ensure ongoing improvement, and not just from the quality control aspect or the QA aspect, but really those performing the day-to-day activities. We then move on to quality control and assurance, and this is about monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of those structures and processes. And really it looks at quality control, which is looking at specific aspects of a process. So for example, you could have a checklist for specific fields on data entry of an ICSR. Performance indicators are a way of monitoring the effectiveness of a process overall. And an audit looks at a bigger picture, bigger facets of the QMS usually. For example, it could be the PSUR process as a whole. This then goes into quality improvements, and this is where you get that feedback, you look at everything, and you look at what needs to be amended on an ongoing basis. This is looking at feedback, your deviations, which could be planned or unplanned, and your CAPAs as well, your corrective and preventative actions. And this feedback, you look at what is required with regards to changes to your quality system, and it goes back into your quality planning and changing your processes. So looking at the responsibilities of the MAH, so the quality objectives really are put in place to ensure that the MAH can comply with the legal requirements for pharmacovigilance tasks and responsibilities, to ensure that harm is prevented from adverse reactions, and to promote the safe and effective use of medicines, ensuring that there's timely info to healthcare professionals and public with regards to safety, and overall contributing to the protection of patients and public health, and which is the end goal overall in what we're doing. You need to really define in advance what the quality objectives should be and the method of monitoring effectiveness of those. Now, for the individual GVP modules, there is a QMS section in each of those modules, and they should be used with regards to defining quality objectives for those specific areas. Right, moving on. Okay, I've just seen a blank screen here, which is not great, so I will provide an updated one. But if you did have the slide, you'd be able to see that I'm on here. The QMS documentation is really about making sure that you have documentation in an orderly fashion, and this really is in the form of written policies and procedures, and that is in the implementing regulation. I really do apologize for this slide. I will get it out to everyone that's on the webinar. what you have with regards to the documentation is a quality plan usually, and here you have your quality objectives that are stated and the processes that are needed to achieve this. Your quality manual talks about the scope of the quality system and the processes of the quality system and how they interact. And then you have your procedures, which show you your specific way to carry out the process. So these are what we're used to with regards to your SOPs and your work instructions. And then your quality record, which documents really what the results achieved are or the evidence of activities performed. So it could be a checklist, for example. That would be your quality record. And those documents make up the documentation of, well, part of the documentation of the quality system. Now, of course, these are, you do need to have document control here, and they should be subject to normal document control with regards to the creation, when the documents were created, revision, when revision was required, approval, implementation, and version control as well. So other aspects of documentation that are required, again, these are all detailed within the implementing regulation. So organizational structure and assignment of tasks to personnel so people know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Training plans and records need to be in place, as well as instructions for the compliance management processes. Also, appropriate instructions on processes that need to be used in case of urgency, including business continuity. Performance indicators that are used continuously to monitor good performance of your pharmacovigilance activities, and quality audit reports with the dates and the results as well. And again, these are all part of the implementing regulation. There are some additional requirements for the marketing authorization holder. And actually, I'm going to stop there because I think actually we may have the wrong slide set, but I will work through it, so apologies for that. There are actually additional activities for the marketing authorization holder that are detailed within the implementing regulation again. Job description, organizational chart are important, and within the PSMF you do have to talk about human resource management, critical processes, and record management. If you look at what's also recommended, although this isn't required as such, but it does form good practice overall for your QMS documentation, these are things such as methods for your monitoring of the efficient operating of the QMS, your record management policy, your records demonstrating the key steps or procedures have been taken, and your records for facilities and equipment. So this could be things such as your functionality checks, your qualification, validation activities, etc., for some of the equipment that's used. And also records to look at your CAPA management to ensure that they have been addressed properly, monitored, and that they have been reviewed on a regular basis and closed out appropriately. So if we look at the QMS overall, I mean, one aspect of the GVP module is that personnel and upper management are extremely important. We do need to have an environment where issues can be raised and where quality is really seen as an essential aspect of day-to-day functioning. So upper management need to ensure that there is a culture where staff are able to speak out properly and to act with responsibility. Roles and responsibilities need to be assigned appropriately and should be based on competencies as well. And this needs to be communicated and implemented within the organization. And overall, everybody is responsible for quality within an organization, and this really feeds into that continuous quality improvement. So looking at compliance management, so for the purpose of compliance management, specific quality system procedures and processes should be in place. And these should ensure the following. And what I've done here is listed the areas to be covered and, again, the implementing regulation, so you can cross-refer and see where these have come from. So the areas are continuous monitoring of PV data, looking for risk minimization and prevention, and that appropriate measures are taken by the MAH. Making sure that there's scientific evaluation of all information on the risks, especially with regards to adverse reactions, both within and outside the terms of its license, and also associated with occupational exposure. make sure data is accurate and verifiable, and sent within the appropriate time limits. Also, looking at the quality, integrity and completeness of the information that's sent through, and this means that you have to ensure that there's no duplicate submissions and that signals are validated appropriately as well. Effective communication with the NCA with regards to risks, with regards to changes in those risks, the PSMF, risk management systems, risk minimization measures, safety update reports, CAPAs, and post-authorization safety studies. Update to product information to make sure that it's updated in light of scientific knowledge, and appropriate communication to healthcare professionals and patients with regards to safety. And from that, you can see where the list of critical processes come from. And every company needs to have this in place to ensure that they have a compliant PV system. And you can see, you'll be able to see when I go through this, that there are links to the previous two slides. So first of all, making sure that you've got a process to meet commitments and respond to requests from the NCA, interaction between pharmacovigilance and quality defects, communication about safety concerns between MAH and NCA, especially with regards to risk-benefit, communicating information to patients and healthcare professionals, ensuring that product information is kept up to date, variation implementation for safety reasons based on the urgency as well, looking at the continuous safety profile of the product with benefit-risk evaluation, establishing, assessing and implementing risk management systems, evaluating the effectiveness of risk minimization, ICSR management, signal management, and PSURs. And these are all detailed in GVP Module 1. So another aspect of the QMS are resources and training. And it's important that as an MAH there are enough competent, appropriately qualified and trained personnel to perform PV activities. For this, you would really need to look at a resource analysis in some way to show that you have got enough people to perform the activities that are required within your organization that relate to PV. Job descriptions to ensure that people know exactly what they're responsible for, and CV to show that they have the right qualifications to perform that activity. You need to ensure initial and continued training, and this is where training plans come into play. Initial training would be on SOPs, legislation before they actually go on to perform the activity. Competency framework is useful because that shows that somebody is competent in an area before they are then left to do that independently. And a training plan should show you overall exactly what is required for ongoing training. Training should relate to the roles and responsibilities, and that's where training matrix is essential so that you can see the role or the responsibility and check that they have had the training that's needed for that role. You need to check that the training leads to understanding, and this is where knowledge testing comes in. So when you have had training on legislation, procedures, different aspects of things, you need to ensure that there is some knowledge testing in some way to show that that training has worked and somebody has understood the training that's been given to them. And lastly, the training for non-PV groups. So these are people in sales, marketing, generally everybody within the company would receive general PV training on how to identify a case and special situations, where to report that. And that should be documented. And again, you should have knowledge assessment associated with that. Okay, facilities are also covered within GVP Module 1, so you need to have suitable and sufficient premises, facilities and equipment to ensure the proper conduct of pharmacovigilance activity. So as we know, IT systems absolutely key. Make sure that they are fit for purpose, qualification, validation activities need to be around this. I mean, a safety database we all know about and the headaches around that. Make sure that the IT systems are kept up to date. Looking at electronic storage, so where you are actually storing the data, and actual storage space as well. So where perhaps you have your hard copy documents, where is that kept? Is that appropriate? Is that suitable? And we'll come on to document control in a minute, and you'll understand perhaps where it fits in. And then also to check regularly your different devices, your different appliances, e.g., your fax machine, make sure that it is functioning properly if that is used for dissemination of information or receipt of information within the organization. And then business continuity. So a bit more on business continuity. So these need to be established on a risk-based manner, absolutely essential. This is to ensure that you can carry on as required to have a compliant PV system should there be an issue, a serious issue of any kind. And the issues that you're talking about here are where staff and infrastructure are affected, or maybe you don't have access to the site or access to your database. Those kind of situations where you do need to carry on, but your processes are not as you would normally have. You need to have backup systems for urgent exchange of information, either within the organization or between organizations, and also with the NCA, so that you can maintain that line of communication. Now, your business continuity plan should be tested on a regular basis to ensure that you can that it works properly, and that there are no issues associated with it, and you can get continuous work with regards to your PV system. And this should be documented as well, and you should keep that documentation to show that you have tested that on a regular basis and that you can maintain your PV functioning should there be an issue. So if we look at the record management system, so this is an important part of your QMS as well, and it includes really the completeness, accuracy, integrity, and timely access as well to all records and retention of your documents. So you should have a record management policy within the organization, and you need to record all pharmacovigilance information and keep it for at least 10 years post-expiry of your marketing authorization. Now, the types of information that we're used to keeping are your cases, your source data, that kind of thing. However, you do need to make sure that data around investigation of safety concerns, any timelines with dates, your trackers, those kind of things are kept as well. And anything that is used with regards to or shows your decision-making process, because that could be where the issues come up later on, where you'd want to look back and see how a decision was made and when it was made. Okay? You need to ensure retrievability and traceability, and this is where you have, if you have electronic systems, your backup of your electronic files is important, or if you've got hard copy archiving, make sure waterproof, fireproof, so those documents cannot be destroyed. Data protection is important, and all pharmacovigilance activities should make sure that the right of personal data protection is maintained, and there should be strict access limits to documents and database only to authorized personnel, and that is again part of the implementing regulation. Patient confidentiality needs to be considered at each step of the PV process as well, and specific measures should be taken at each of those steps to ensure data security and confidentiality are maintained. So when looking at subcontracting, of course, we know that the MAH retains responsibility for all of these activities, and there should be very detailed subcontracts are drawn up, and these should be included in the PSMS. Other things to consider are your audits, and when you would audit a contractor and how you would do that as well. Training as well to ensure that they are really compliant with your processes and your quality management system. And then you should also have a process, or certainly a process for managing subcontractors that does then go into a procedure. So I've just touched on audit planning here. I mean, audits really are a way of monitoring the quality management system overall, and you have your strategic level long-term planning, which kind of tells you what situations would lead to an audit. And so that could be things like, I've listed here, major restructuring, any legislation changes, or if you have many people leaving a department, you just want to make sure that everything is as it should be within the organization with regards to your PV system. Then you'd have your tactical plan, which would cover usually a year. It's a schedule of where you're going to performing your audits, and then the operational level is how you would perform that actual audit on an audit by audit basis. Now, of course, the QPPV can request an audit at any time, or if there are areas of non-compliance that have been highlighted, then of course you can ask for an audit in that area, or you should actually audit that area. And a quality manual should actually state when an audit is appropriate. So that comes back to the QMS overall and detailing how that QMS functions. So I know that in a lot of companies, of course, there are huge quality departments, but in other companies, in smaller companies, that's not necessarily the case. And I think it's important to have a quality responsible person, team, department within the organization. You need to have somebody where the focus, or a team where the focus is quality. They have the right background, the right understanding. And although we do monitor on an ongoing basis, and this is built into the QMS, there are lots of facets to oversee. And I really do think that there does need to be a regular quality meeting with a cross-functional team. And this is important because you need to look at the various aspects of your KPIs, your key performance indicators, your feedback from personnel, deviations as well, both planned and unplanned, to look at those potential gaps in your processes, your CAPA management to make sure they're closed out appropriately, and really check how the quality management system is functioning and is it doing what it should be doing. I think it's also important because it brings everybody, all the functions really, to the same page, and it ensures agreement as well on what needs to be done really moving forward. So I think that is absolutely essential. I mean, quality really, it does infiltrate into the different functions, and you need buy-in from all of those different functions to ensure that you have something that does work well within the organization and is fit for purpose. I mean, senior management involvement, we've already talked about, certainly drives the culture through the organization, but it is important to define exactly what your governance process will be. If serious issues are identified, what is the escalation process and how is that managed? And that should be within your quality policy or quality manual overall, and detail exactly what should be done. And then, of course, QPPV involvement is paramount overall because this is a quality management system to check that or to ensure that your PV system is operating in a compliant fashion. Now, again, a lot of companies have very good kind of electronic systems. Now, when I've gone into some companies, it can be hard to tie all of this together. Certainly, the different aspects of the documents, etc., the procedures, the work instructions, and how that all fits together. And sometimes I've found that just having a spreadsheet can help you just to get that overview and ensure that everything slots in as it should do, and you've covered everything as well. So on this, you could have your procedures, your work instruction, which shows the version, the approval date, implementation date, when the review is required, and cross-referencing as well to the different forms and the different procedures so that you can make sure that everything fits together properly. You could list your forms as well here. You could have your training matrix, which shows exactly what roles, what job roles need to be trained on the different procedures and work instructions. Your KPIs as well that monitor the effectiveness of the system, and your deviations as well, your planned or unplanned, because they will feed back into the system. You will need to review them on a regular basis to check whether your system needs changing. Your CAPAs and your minutes of meetings, and so generally it will be all in one place where perhaps it's a bit more manageable. Again, there are systems that will, I think there are systems that will do that for you. But again, they can be quite costly to implement, and sometimes it's easier to go back to basics and start from scratch. Now, as I said, the QMS requirements are in each of the GVP modules, and I've tried to pick out some of the areas so you can see what things do need to be captured. If you look at the PSMF, here, the QMS needs to ensure that changes to the PSMF are documented, and the QPPV needs to be aware of these changes. And you could use a time frame for updating the QPPV the measure for this in some way, or update of the PSMF itself. And again, as you put your process together, you should look at what your performance indicators, or what you would want to use as your performance indicators to show that you have an effective PV system. And that should really be linked to what the legislative requirements are. The document itself is subject to the usual document controls, and also there needs to be periodic review of the PSMF, whether changes are needed or not. So again, that could be something you could put in as a performance indicator, updating or review of the PSMF every 6 months, something similar to that. Looking at risk management systems, so again, the quality system here should ensure that the QPPV is aware of the RMP and also that they have authority over the content. So they would need to sign that and show that they have approved the content and aware of what is included. Again, that could be used as one of your PIs. The QMS also states that there needs to be records of when the RMP was submitted and what was submitted as well. So a tracking system would be needed in some way usually, just to ensure that you know what's been submitted, what version, etc., and what changes have been made. If we look at ICSRs, now we're quite used to a lot of kind of metrics and KPIs around this, but I'll go through some of the requirements with regard to the QMS that's documented within the module. So here we need to ensure that there is compliance with the quality standards at every stage of case documentation, which includes collection, data transfer, management, coding, validation, evaluation, case follow-up, reporting, archiving, and source data. And source data-wise, you need to verify that what's entered onto the database is what you've received. And again, that's something that could be used from a PI perspective. So essential field completion may be in X% of cases with 100% accuracy. Also need to review follow-up to ensure that all non-valid cases are followed up for healthcare professional confirmation, or follow-up generally as per process to complete the details of the case to enable adequate assessment. So those are things that you could potentially use as your performance indicator. Training is important here, and having a competency framework and a training matrix is probably essential. And also training of other staff, as we'd covered previously, to ensure that they know how to identify a case and report it. And of course, we're used to the reporting to the National Competence Authority and making sure that you're in line with regards to the timeframes for reporting. So looking at the PSUR now, again, this is another large area, probably due to the amount of data and where this is all coming from. And you need to have processes here for the preparation, quality control, review and submission of your PSURs, including follow-up and after their assessment. So with regards to gathering of the data, all data sources should be retrieved. Normally you would have a data request form to show that. And data that's included in the summary tabulations needs to undergo source data verification as well against the MAH's safety database to ensure that the accuracy really of what you're presenting, and make sure you are presenting the right thing. Also, any of the queries that are used for the database should be kept, and they should be reviewed to ensure you know exactly what you are retrieving from the database. You need to ensure all of the actions that have been requested by the National Competence Authority have been addressed, and this again points towards a tracking system of some kind of the assessment reports that come through, making sure you detail what the requirements are and allocate a time frame for implementation of that. And again, that could serve as a PI, a performance indicator. The quality system needs to ensure that non-submission or late submission doesn't occur. So you need to have an appropriate schedule in place that is reviewed regularly. Usually, in most companies, it's on an annual basis. And you also need to make sure you review the EU reference date list as well to look for any changes there to make sure your schedule is up to date. Your quality of data should be monitored, and again, normally there's a QC check. And you could have a QC checklist here documenting the percentage errors that are, looking at specific fields and specific data and documented percentage errors there. Overall, we want to make sure that, that you have minimal requests for monitoring, follow-up, etc., and that the assessor overall does agree with your assessment. Internal timelines are usually used for the development of the document, so there are internal timelines that are usually put into the processes to make sure you get to a final document in time for submission to the competent authority, and these can be tracked and can be used to evaluate the internal process. Okay, moving on now. I'm looking at the time. We don't have too many slides to go through, only 3. So we have post-authorization safety studies, and there isn't too much really detailed within the QMS section of this module, but there is a need for data retention and to ensure that the analytical data sets and statistical programs that are used for generating the data in the final study report are kept in the electronic format and are available for audit. Now, the quality system needs to ensure that the submission of the various documents as details of the protocol, final study report, when you have a publication, are compliant really with the timelines that are defined within the legislation and the module, and usually you would have a tracker for that. Of course, the QPPV would need to sign off on all of the protocols related to PAS, and you could use that as a KPI as well as registration. So if we look at signal management or signal detection, here training is extremely important, and that's to ensure that those conducting signal detection have the right skills and are able to perform that activity appropriately. So here you would need to make sure that the matrix is in place, competency framework, also job description and CV, and these should be kept and archived so that you can prove that in years to come. You do need a tracking system, as an audit trail is required of all the signal management activities, and that includes your validation, your analysis, your closing out, your decision-making process as well. And again, you could use the time frames for that, percentage, signal validation within X days as a performance indicator. Certainly the tracking system or the audit trail is an implementing regulation requirement. And then looking at safety communication, really here it's about making sure that the information provided is accurate and clear, and having a process that enables relevant cross-functional review of that. For regionalisation, you need to have the track versions of materials to the National Competent Authority. That should be version controlled, and making sure that links in with your risk management system. The implementation at the local level needs to be tracked to ensure that the healthcare professionals are receiving the right material, and you need to have a process that ensures that you report on the results of the evaluation of effectiveness as needed. So I know that's quite a trip through, but I hope it gives you an idea overall of kind of the different documentation within the quality management system and the different areas that you need to focus on to ensure that you have a compliant PV system. I mean, if we look at QMS deficiencies, they have really become the main reason for critical findings in MHRA inspections. I think it highlights the issues overall with, yes, people are doing things, but perhaps it's the documentation, it's the evidence of effectiveness, it's all of those other aspects that perhaps aren't being covered appropriately. It is a complicated system. There are many different interacting facets. It doesn't just end with the implementation of an SOP, and it really is a continuous cycle of improvement. And you have to look at the individual modules to ensure that you're meeting the QMS requirements for each of those different activities. And you have to see how they all interlink, because they do interlink. I think overall, certainly, it is an important area. It is an essential part of the PV system, because it really gives you that documented proof that your system is compliant, especially if implemented properly, and the assurance then that the benefit risk profile of your product is being managed appropriately and in accordance with the legislation, and to ensure patient protection, which is what we are about at the end of the day. So I'm going to finish there. Sorry that I'm 5 minutes late. I will sort out that additional slide. Are there any questions? So I've got a couple of questions here. Does the legislation regarding QMS also apply to device vigilance? No, it doesn't. Device vigilance has a slightly different system and is more on kind of device risk basis, which is slightly, it's about the actual product and user testing and all of that. So it's slightly different. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Jose. And KPIs, I think there are a difficulty with key performance indicators is we're certainly used to the ICSR ones. I think when you come to the other areas that you're looking at, it's a little bit more difficult to define. What I suggest, though, is taking the QMS pieces in the modules and really taking them apart and detailing what you would expect to see, because that will help you to define what your key performance indicators are. Yeah, I mean, there was going to be, I believe, if I remember correctly, there was going to be guidance from the EMA, but I think they scrapped that and it didn't provide KPIs. Okay, anything else? Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I'll close out there. If you do have any questions, please do send them through, and I'll do my best to answer what I can. Thank you.